Now, there's another detail about Weston that I don't think enough people are talking about, and it may actually explain why the writers introduced him in the first place. When you compare him to Commander Judd, the difference is obvious. Judd is written to be hated almost immediately. The audience rarely questions his motives because they're usually selfish, cruel, or openly manipulative. Dr. Grove serves a similar purpose. He's the kind of villain whose actions remind us just how horrifying Gilead really is beneath its religious language. These characters push the story forward because they represent the obvious evil within the regime. Weston serves a completely different function. Instead of asking whether he's evil, the writers want us to ask how he's evil. That's a much more interesting question. If Weston had behaved exactly like Judd, viewers would have written him off within a few episodes. Instead, almost every interaction with Agnes creates uncertainty. Sometimes he seems protective, other times he seems calculating. Occasionally, he appears sympathetic, only for the next scene to remind us that he's still one of the most powerful men in a dictatorship. That uncertainty isn't a flaw in the writing. I think it's the entire point. The Testaments has always explored how authoritarian systems survive. They don't survive only because of obvious monsters. They survive because ordinary-looking people continue making decisions that keep the system alive. Some convince themselves they're doing the right thing. Others tell themselves they're preventing something even worse. And some simply become so comfortable with power that they stop questioning where it comes from. Weston feels like someone who falls into that last category. One thing I also find interesting is that Weston never seriously challenges Gilead itself. Think about every supposedly compassionate thing he does throughout the season. None of those actions threaten the regime. Helping Becka? It delays her punishment but doesn't challenge the system that condemned her. Listening to Agnes? That makes him appear considerate without changing the reality of her lack of freedom. Ending the engagement peacefully? That protects his reputation while avoiding unnecessary conflict. Every decision is incredibly measured. It's almost as if Weston constantly calculates exactly how much compassion he can show before it begins costing him personally. And that's where I think many viewers misunderstand him. Some fans argue that Weston could secretly become one of the heroes in Season 2. Personally, I think that's unlikely, not because people can't change, but because the story hasn't shown us any evidence that Weston fundamentally rejects Gilead. He's shown hesitation, but he hasn't shown rebellion. Those are very different things. There's another possibility that I think deserves more attention. What if Weston isn't being set up for redemption at all? What if he's being positioned as Agnes's final lesson about power? Throughout both The Handmaid's Tale and The Testaments, young women repeatedly discover that the most dangerous men aren't always the most openly violent ones. Sometimes they're the men who appear safe enough to trust. Agnes has already survived Paula's emotional manipulation. She's witnessed Dr. Grove's abuse. She's seen Commander Judd's corruption. Weston may represent the final stage of that education, learning that even someone who appears reasonable can still choose the system over doing what's right. That would be an incredibly powerful lesson for her character going into Season 2. It would also explain why Weston quietly walks away instead of becoming openly hostile. His rejection teaches Agnes something important without requiring another dramatic confrontation. There's also the possibility that the writers are playing a much longer political game with his character. Remember, Weston isn't just another commander. He's the head of the Eyes. That position gives him access to information almost nobody else possesses. He likely knows secrets about commanders, secrets about Mayday, secrets about the Aunts, secrets about the Resistance. In other words, Weston isn't important only because of Agnes. He's important because of what he knows. And if Gilead's internal power struggle continues growing in Season 2, someone with that much information could become one of the most influential characters in the entire series. That also explains why so many fans believe Aunt Lydia and Weston may eventually cross paths again in a much bigger way. Whether they become allies or enemies almost doesn't matter. Their relationship would immediately raise the stakes because both characters understand that information is often more valuable than violence. Lydia fights using knowledge. Weston controls knowledge. That alone makes them incredibly interesting pieces on the same chessboard. Finally, let's talk about what all these theories have in common. Almost every fan theory tries to answer the same question. Is Weston actually capable of genuine goodness? I think the show is asking a different question entirely. Not whether Weston is good, but whether goodness can even survive inside someone who willingly helps run Gilead. That's a much harder question to answer, because even if Weston genuinely cared about Agnes, even if he sincerely wanted to help Becka, none of those actions erase the fact that he still helped maintain one of the most oppressive governments imaginable. That's why I don't think the writers want viewers arguing over whether Weston is secretly a hero. They want us arguing over whether occasional kindness changes anything when someone continues serving an evil system. Personally, I don't think it does. It may make Weston more human, but sympathy and redemption are not the same thing. As things stand, Commander Seth Weston remains one of the most unpredictable characters in the Testaments. Every theory we've discussed is possible because the writers have intentionally avoided giving us a simple answer. They've created a man who can appear compassionate in one scene and deeply unsettling in the next. And that's exactly why fans can't stop talking about him. Whether he becomes Aunt Lydia's unlikely ally, Agnes's greatest disappointment, or one of the final obstacles standing in Mayday's path, one thing seems certain. The writers did not spend an entire season building a character this layered just to push him into the background. His story is only beginning, and if Season 2 finally reveals what Commander Seth Weston has really been hiding all along, it could completely change the way we look back at every single scene he has already been in. There is one final reason I think Commander Weston has become one of the most discussed characters in the Testaments, and it has very little to do with whether he is secretly good or secretly evil. It has everything to do with perspective. Think about how different Weston looks depending on whose eyes we're seeing him through. From Agnes's perspective, he initially appears to be one of the few commanders willing to treat her with a measure of respect. Compared to the horror stories surrounding other marriages in Gilead, Weston almost seems like the best possible outcome. That alone says a lot about how broken Gilead society really is. The standard has become so low that basic politeness starts to feel extraordinary. But then step outside Agnes's perspective for a moment. This is still the man leading the eyes. Every family living in fear of being watched, every citizen afraid to speak openly, and every act of surveillance that keeps Gilead functioning exists because men like Weston continue doing their jobs. Suddenly, those small moments of kindness look very different. They are no longer enough to outweigh the position he willingly holds. And I think that is exactly the emotional conflict the writers wanted the audience to experience. Instead of giving us another straightforward villain, they created someone who constantly forces us to ask difficult questions. Can a person occasionally do the right thing while still serving an evil system? Does showing mercy erase the harm caused by the institution they protect? Is being better than Commander Judd actually enough, or have we simply lowered the standard because Gilead itself is so horrifying? Those questions don't have easy answers, and that is precisely why Weston feels so compelling. Looking ahead to Season 2, I don't think the biggest surprise will be whether Weston turns out to be good or bad. I think the bigger surprise will be discovering what he truly wants. We know he values power. We know he protects his reputation. We know he calculates his decisions carefully, but we still don't know his ultimate goal. Is he trying to survive the collapse of Gilead? Is he positioning himself to become even more powerful? Could he eventually see Commander Judd as a rival rather than an ally? Or has the loss of his first family left him carrying motivations we still know nothing about? Those are the mysteries that make him one of the most important characters to watch moving forward. For now, though, one thing seems clear. Commander Seth Weston is not just another commander added to the story to fill out Gilead's leadership. He has been written with far too much care, given far too many morally complex scenes, and connected to far too many major characters for his role to end here. Whether he ultimately becomes an ally, an enemy, or something much more complicated, his choices could shape Agnes's future, influence Aunt Lydia's plans, and even affect the balance of power inside Gilead itself. And until the series finally reveals what Commander Seth Weston has really been hiding all along, the biggest mystery isn't whether we should trust him, it's whether the writers ever intended us to.